This is the blind hem by hand. I marked the finished length of my fabric, and I actually left my line visible so that you could see it, but ideally you would use a disappearing ink or a tailor's chalk, something that you wouldn't actually see when it's done. And I folded it on that line and pressed it up, and my cut edge, instead of turning it under to make a fold, I just serged the edge. Ideally, you would serge with thread that matches your fabric, but I wanted you to be able to see the contrast in this case. Therefore, I used a contrasting color. Ideally, it would be the same color. Or if I have like off-white fabric, I will just use white serging thread. That way you don't have to buy a bunch of colors. So anything that's light colored for fabric, I would use white serger thread, and if it's dark, I use black. Now to thread our needle, instead of having kind of an inch or so of a tail for your thread where it's kind of hard to line up, right? I like to hold my tail so that it's just a little speck between my fingers, and then I put my eye of my needle right near that speck, and then I just unpinch my fingers carefully, and then it's in the eye of my needle already. And then you sort of fold your thread in half-ish, so the halfway point is in your eye of your needle. And you really don't, when it's folded, you don't want anything more than an arm's length of thread. So then you're going to put your tails together-ish, about the same length, somewhere near. They don't have to be perfect. And then you hold the eye of your needle in your dominant hand, and then add those tails to the pinched fingers that you have, and then wrap about 3 times with the end of your thread. So this is the part that's in the eye of your needle, and then this is the part nearest the tails, and this is the part that you want to be wrapping. And then you hold that wrap inside your pinched fingers with your tail, and then you keep your fingers pinched and just slowly pull that thread through your fingers, and then it ends up knotting the end when you're done. So that's how you knot your needle. And then I have thread conditioner that I'd like to use when I hand sew, and you just lay the thread on top and pinch your thumb down onto the conditioner, and then you just run your thread through it a couple of times. This cuts down on drag and friction on your thread as it goes through the fabric, and it just makes the process a little smoother and faster. And then I just kind of run my hand down it a couple times to smooth it. So I'm right-handed, and I normally, when I stitch, I work from right to left. But for the blind hem, I like to work from left to right. So the first thing you're going to do is put your needle through the fold of your fabric right below the serging. And then you're just going to come out with your needle, and then your tail and your knot will stay inside that fold, and they'll be hidden inside your hem. Okay, so then you go, I came out right here. So now right above this serging, and slightly you kind of go back a half a step, I'm gonna just take a little bite with the tip of my needle, and you only want a couple of threads of the weave of the fabric. Normally this would be a seam, like a side seam or something. You wouldn't just have an empty edge on your project. So I'm gonna, after I take that bite, I'm gonna just pull my thread. And so right now, the stitch that you see is a diagonal backwards stitch. So then after I do that stitch, I'm going to move forward and then sneak my needle behind my serging and come out in front of my serging. And then just pull through. So now you've got a diagonal going this to the left on the front, and on the back, your diagonal is going down to the right. So after I take my stitch under my serging here, I'm going to go in between these 2 stitches right here above the serging and take another small bite of my regular fabric. So not into my serging, just the fabric right above my serging. and then pull it to the left. And then I'm going to move forward behind my fabric, come out under my serging. If your thread kind of starts to bubble, I just kind of push it down through, and then it kind of smooths itself out in the eye. Okay, I came out under the serging. I'm going to go above and in between the two stitches and take a small bite. You really don't want to take a big bite, because if you notice, if you peek on the other side, you can see your needle, and so that's how big your thread stitch is going to look when you have a stitch there. So to double check how big your stitch is, that's a good thing to do, is just kind of turn it over and see, okay, how much needle is showing? That's how much thread will be showing. So I really just have a very small amount, and that's how much thread will show. You can just kind of see my needle shine there. And if you were using a matching thread the same color as your fabric, or like one shade darker, you wouldn't be able to see those stitches. So now I'm going to go forward, grab under the serging, back, grab a couple threads. So this stitch goes backwards and then forward. It kind of does that loop, and it's almost like backwards number sevens is kind of what it looks like in the fabric. This is a really good, it's a strong stitch for a hem, so like the pants hem or something that's going to get a lot of wear. And also it's very invisible, so it's the best of both worlds. This is probably one of my favorite hemming hand stitches. I actually prefer to use this stitch instead of using the blind hem on my sewing machine. I just think it's even more invisible than you can get with a sewing machine. I just think it's a more professional product when you're done. And if you can't serge, maybe you don't have a serger, you can buy hem tape and just kind of straight stitch it down, and then you would be stitching through the hem tape, or you could just turn and fold your raw edge too. You don't have to have a serged edge. This is just sort of mimicking how when you buy pants at the store, this is sort of mimicking what they look like. So I just think it's a really nice looking stitch when it's finished. So that's what it looks like on the inside of your hem. And naturally, if I used white serging and off-white thread, you wouldn't see that at all. And then this is what the outside of my pant leg would look like, or my skirt, whatever the garment is. You would just see those tiny little dots of thread, and if it was matching thread, you wouldn't see them at all. Okay, this is how we tie off. Maybe we've gotten down to our last 3 inches of thread, and we need to tie off so that we can start a new needle and thread. If you have less than 3 inches of thread though, it's really hard to knot and start again. So make sure you have at least 3 inches to work with. Save at least 3 inches to knot with. Okay, so after I did my last bite in the top of the fabric, before I go into my next stitch here, I'm just gonna tip over my serged edge here and just take a bite right in the serging. And it's okay if you see this stitch because it's inside the hem. And I just take 2 stitches right in a row. So the first stitch, and then this stitch is going to make loop number 1. Don't let loop number 1 close. I usually grab it with a finger. And then I'm going to put my needle into loop number 1, which actually makes loop number 2. So loop number 2, you do not want to close before loop number 1 closes. So now we're going to hold loop number 2 and close loop number 1. And then I'm going to use my needle and go into loop number 2. And that makes loop number 2 and 3. And they're both going to close at the same time. A couple of quick tugs, and I just tuck it in one time for my tail to be secure, and then I cut it about 1 inch long and just tuck it in. So that is the blind hem by hand.